I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's the 20th anniversary of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Like, that blows my mind. It feels like only yesterday when I was in 5th grade and the hype around this film was just so massive. I mean, I remember people in my class just wanting to go see this film. I remember I wanting to go see this film. Everyone was talking about it. It like was the thing.
And now in episode 3, Anakin succumbs to the dark side.
The mania surrounding the marketing was unreal. The merchandising was like next level. Like, do you guys remember those like Burger King exclusive toys and like the watches that came out after the film was on home video? Like, I'm pretty sure I still have the Darth Maul one of those. Like, that's insane. And then the Lego sets, Lego Star Wars. The 2005 was Revenge of the Sith mania. And the fact that I was able to go to a theater, sit down, and watch this movie for the first time since 2005, it filled me with emotion. Like, it brought me back to a time when things were simpler, but also now being, almost 30, and I was able to pick up on a lot of stuff that I don't think I was able to when I was just a kid. And a lot of the things that George Lucas was getting at with this film and his Star Wars prequel trilogy ring just as true today as they did 20 years ago. It's no secret that they've kind of undergone a bit of a reevaluation and reclamation, specifically in the wake of the Disney Star Wars era. And people look back on these films like, Thanos looking at Nebula.
Perhaps I treated you too harshly.
Sith was always generally seen as the best of these three films, whether it's by people who love all of the prequels or, hate all three, or find Sith the only worthwhile one.
This is where the fun begins.
But despite the reappraisal, George Lucas's Dream Trilogy still doesn't quite get the credit it deserves as a trio of artistic expressions and deeply prescient stories.
How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Like, yeah, I think we can look back at them and be like, oh, yay, nostalgia and technological advancements, but there's so much more than that, man. And I don't feel like I ever see people talk about them in that way. Even Sith, with its overall stronger reception, tends to be a little overlooked as the fully executed vision of an artist that it is. I actually reject the idea that it's merely the best of a bad trilogy. No, Revenge of the Sith is, for my money, the culmination of George Lucas's work as a filmmaker and his finest work as a director, flaws be damned. And because it was this cultural phenomenon, the grand finale of Star Wars at the time, we've tended to view Revenge of the Sith on more of a surface level rather than in the context of being the fulfillment of Lucas's vision, and in turn, how it fits into the canon of his filmography. That's without touching on, in 2025, how eerily predictive the film is and how it confronts the chasm of apathy and stubbornness that fascism rises up through. So, with its massive re-release, the fact that it earned, and in some cases surpassed, what a regular film earns in its opening weekend at the box office, now 20 years removed, is nuts. And there's no better time than now, 20 years on, to really shine a light on Revenge of the Sith.
Hello there.
And what a profound artistic and dramatic statement it is. This is George Lucas's masterpiece.
This is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause.
Kill him.
I don't think the boy can handle it. I don't trust him.
Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. Keep alive.
You were my brother, Anakin.
I built it.
There's a lot of debate over Lucas being a political filmmaker, but I think the debate is a little silly. Societal commentary is something that's not only been in his films from the start, but he's arguably toned it down a bit as his career has progressed.
I don't believe that.
And that's saying something considering his films are still incredibly political.
Make a motion in the Senate where that kind of a request belongs.
I mean, you can watch Lucas's short films that precede THX, such as Look at Life, and a lot of it is very politically charged. His work as a feature filmmaker arguably diluted the forcefulness of his commentary, distilling it into grand, poetic storytelling where the commentary sometimes flies over the audience's head.
So love has blinded you.
But Lucas, nonetheless, remained a pretty radical filmmaker throughout his career. His films are voicing anti-authoritarian, leftist views as their stories progress.
So it was a very anti-authoritarian, very kind of 60s against the man kind of thing.
Even American Graffiti, his least political work, is still laden with a taste of the imminent counterculture of the 60s, set in the year before the Kennedy assassination transformed that decade from what it seemed to be to what it really was. The smokescreen of elegance that kept Vietnam in the dregs of the news cycle initially burned away to reveal a Western world that had no love for a quagmire in Southeast Asia.
The good guys are the rebels. They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. I think we call those guys terrorists today. We call them Mujahideen, we call them Al-Qaeda.
When I did it, they were Viet Cong.
Exactly.
1977's original Star Wars, a commentary on the then 2 years expired war. As much as it was a sweeping space epic of good prevailing over fascism and tyranny, paints in a very broad brush. The stakes are high, but the players we see on the board in that film are a pretty small band of heroes and villains respectively. The prequels bring in a lot of these ideas to the forefront, but are more specific, yet also encompassing the wider scale of fascism. Instead of going after the broad idea, Lucas starts interrogating specific structures and systems, trade and capitalism in The Phantom Menace, the ceding of more political power towards an oncoming dictator with a strategy of appeasement in Attack of the Clones, and a deconstruction of how democracy becomes more and more whittled away as we try to find a middle ground with fascism rather than eradicating it. Revenge of the Sith is the synthesis of all of the things that gestated in the works of George Lucas that led to it. Sith is very apparent as a post-9/11 piece, coinciding its fictional war with the start of the Iraq War. It's, in many ways, his most specific, pointed Star Wars film from a commentary perspective, which helps guide his messaging where, as we talked about before, he was previously attacking broad ideas and creating allegories to eras in history, to grander scale events and wars. In Sith, he really zeroes in on fascism as a target. He was coming at the likes of the Patriot Act and projecting the future born from such a thing. And while he was premature, he sadly seems to have not been all that wrong in the end. The Emperor creates a boogeyman in the Separatists, who genuinely have a fair point in their issues with the Republic, but go about handling it in the wrong way in order to justify his takeover. And because a war has been ongoing for years and years, people are quick to back easy authoritarian solutions to bring an end to the conflict. And Sidious preys upon that exhaustion to create a new boogeyman in the Jedi.
From my point of view, the Jedi are evil!
It's a cycle of scapegoating to maintain control, to the point where all anyone knows is a life under Imperial rule. There's an inability to look inward in order to pinpoint a problem that plagues the right. It's a lack of accountability, only hearing what they want to hear in order to justify their actions. That's why Anakin falls to the dark side and why the Republic willingly gives up democracy to construct an empire. In reaching a fine point, Lucas figures out what he wanted the prequels to be, which is probably why this is usually seen as the best, most coherent of the three. With each episode, you can see him figuring out what he wants them to be about. He has to hit the broad lore points, of course, but with each subsequent film, he's revealing the story underneath the story. With Sith, the specifics of how the Empire is created and democracy is eroded are eerily prescient. We'd hand it over rather than having it ripped from our hands.
I didn't want to do a movie about how people take over democracy. I wanted to figure out how democracies give themselves over to tyrants.
A Senate vote in Clones to give Palpatine his emergency powers tips the dominoes. A second vote which turns the Republic into an empire not only passes, but is cheered.
You know, here's an interesting thing about democracy is if you don't treat it well, if you don't do your job, especially if you're a representative, you know, the whole thing can go awry, because if you're always bickering and not agreeing on things and doing the people's work who elected you, a tyrant will come in and take over and do it for you because the people want to get the job done.
That's what this trilogy has been building towards the entire time.
By whom? Who's gonna make them?
I don't know. Someone.
You?
Of course not me.
I have brought peace, freedom, justice, and security to my new empire.
But Sith is specifically about that transition from democracy to authoritarianism.
To a dark place this line of thought will carry us.
How Palpatine gets people on board with his fascist takeover, with grand promises and mischaracterizing the Jedi, those who justifiably see him as a danger, painting them as violent enemies when Palpatine and the clones are the only ones who committed the violence. George Lucas really saw the future through Palpatine, although he certainly overestimated how competent the spearhead of fascism would be. The only way this could have been more accurate was if, Jar Jar became the Emperor, which I think there's a timeline where that happens in, like, Lego Star Wars or something, so who knows. In the original Star Wars, George establishes an idea, a vague conflict that is the Clone Wars. We have no idea what this means at that point in time. It's simply an offhand remark made by Obi-Wan about an event to contextualize the history of the world we're currently in, and also give a bit of context to the fact that there's a rebellion going on and an empire that has risen. But it becomes something else entirely in the prequels, naturally. And in Revenge of the Sith, George revisits the idea that the war itself isn't as important as what the players on the board are trying to get out of it. George figured out that while you can tell compelling war stories within the period that is the Clone Wars, I mean, just look at the incredible animated series, and obviously those events shape our main players here in Revenge of the Sith. I mean, Anakin isn't the same person that he was when we last saw him. But the start of the Iraq War, coupled with what previously happened decades prior in Vietnam, really brings into focus the idea that the conflict itself is a distraction. War has happened, it's right there in the opening crawl, and so the war itself feels less important than what Palpatine is trying to gain from it. If Episode 2 is about the specifics that caused the war to happen, Episode 3 is about Palpatine using the war to leverage power domestically.
He has control of the Senate and the courts. He's too dangerous to be left alive.
The specifics of the war don't really matter. It's about Palpatine taking advantage of people's fears and exhaustion. It's making people comfortable with militarized power. The occupation doesn't feel out of place because the galaxy's been at war. You don't notice the fascism seeping over it all. Just like Iraq, the Forever War, once the war has started, you don't have to keep justifying it. Lucas is telling a story about how emotional instability, this fear, this exhaustion, is a pathway to authoritarianism, which is the pathway Star Wars has taken throughout its course. Even now, in Andor, the desperate urge for power and control urges the actions of Dedra and Krennic. Their own crazed hunger tilts the course of the Empire from fascism and labor prisons to planet-killing space stations.
Stand here amidst my achievement!
In the context of Revenge of the Sith, it's about how the entitlement and emotional immaturity of Anakin is preyed upon by actual authoritarians who understand how to manipulate and weaponize it to take control. The post-9/11 aughts were characterized by mass paranoia of terrorism and the country largely condoning violent state actions and the fall of civil liberties in the name of security. I don't think it's a coincidence that life imitated art from 1977 to the mid-2000s, just as I don't think it's a coincidence that it happened again from 2005 to 2025. Anakin literally makes a deal with the devil. I mean, like Bush making a deal with Cheney in the name of security, without rationally thinking through what that entails. This culminates in a battle on Mustafar, a hellhole with his former brother and friend where the outcome is irrelevant and too late because the damage has been done. All it really stands to do is fracture a friendship, a brotherhood, an oath, and loyalty to the tenets that Obi-Wan represents.
Anakin, my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy!
Anakin emerges from hell, scarred and transformed, a shell of his former self, more machine than man, more ruthless and with his empathy removed. He becomes an embodiment of the empire he helped build and a rejection of the remnants of humanity that remain dormant, scattered across the galaxy. Anakin is our proxy with which to glimpse the dark side. He's the most prominent character who goes along with Palpatine. The manipulation of Anakin is a microcosm of the tricks Palpatine is playing on the entire Republic government. He grooms Anakin while antagonizing the two branches of government and uses Anakin and Padme's relationship as the torque with which to destroy everything. Anakin's undoing was all gamed out by Lucas on the page, but by Palpatine in the story. But you don't necessarily know exactly where it's going by the end of episode 2 until it becomes clear in Revenge of the Sith. The problem is not that he was in love with Padme, but rather the possessiveness he had over her. He doesn't just want to be with her, he defines his entire being by his love for her. In any case, you have an emotionally unstable guy in Anakin who, when Qui-Gon takes him, is too old, has too many attachments, and is ill-suited to go down a pathway of detachment. Maybe Qui-Gon figured out a way for it to work. I mean, he struggled with the nature of the Jedi Order, but still believed in the heart of it, still believed spiritually. But when he dies, and it forces the Council and Obi-Wan, people who are ill-equipped to handle this situation, people who didn't want Anakin to be a Jedi to begin with, to take the reins. And Obi-Wan himself is ill-equipped to be a master, which is why I think he approaches training Anakin like a little brother, and why Anakin gets so pissed when Obi-Wan flips the switch at certain times and tries to behave in a manner he thinks Qui-Gon would. Anakin already has an ego because he's been told that he's the chosen one, and a massive chip on his shoulder because he's not being granted all of these opportunities that he was promised. And when you add that to him taking everything so personally, such as Obi-Wan's guidance, the Council, I mean, even Padme asking him reasonably to talk to the Chancellor about ending the war, and he
Don't ask me to do that.
sees all of this as manipulation and just a personal attack on his character, I mean, you get a recipe for disaster. Anakin is someone who doesn't really understand how the world works, and so kind of just lets his emotions dictate every ounce of his being, and that's not good. I'm not saying the Jedi are right for abducting kids at a young age and indoctrinating them either, but there is something to be said about the discipline and effectiveness of how they operate. The hubris of the Jedi comes in how they dispassionately judge situations and treat incredibly abnormal, suspicious, and dangerous things as normal. They are complicit in normalizing the authoritarian shift of the Republic that gave rise to Palpatine and Vader. The problem with Anakin and the Jedi is that Anakin is entirely too consumed and dictated by his emotions, and the Jedi are entirely too passive and objective. Lucas makes this abundantly clear that neither is the right path to go on, and that some balance of the two, being able to be rational and yet compassionate, is the best way forward. Which is why I think Padme is ultimately the tragic hero of this story. She embodies both compassion and reason.
This war represents a failure to listen.
Anakin tries to intellectualize an emotional response of fear and insecurity and rationalize his actions through protecting Padme, which is exactly in line with what authoritarians and those who appease them do. Rationalize, justify, let fester. The Jedi ultimately fail in Revenge of the Sith because they adhere too strictly to the rules of the system their enemies exploit. And when they decide to act, when Mace Windu attempts to arrest the Chancellor, it's too late.
I am the Senate.
Padme is sure of her sense of self and her beliefs in a way Anakin isn't, and won't sacrifice her convictions simply because she loves Anakin. She also faced adversity as the Queen of Naboo given her age, and also her place as a woman in the Senate, and still maintained her resolve. It's also telling that a lot of the cut material for her character is trying to form some kind of rebellion in the Senate to oppose the Emperor's authoritarian takeover. Her, Bail, and Mon Mothma represent the real heroic public servants. The people who aren't interested in playing politics and actually give a damn about their constituents. I mean, even with a family and kids on the horizon, she refuses to change her thinking in the name of self-interests. She continues to put herself out there for what's right and for the future of her unborn children, and it costs her her life. She doesn't make loving Anakin her entire being, as Anakin does with her.
So love has blinded you?
With Anakin, he really only cares about his attachments and nothing else, with the slip being his last-minute plea to Padme that he can overthrow the Emperor and they can make things the way they want it to be. That's the poison pill of authoritarianism. You have a structure built solely around people wanting to protect their self-interests and advance their status, instead of adhering to morals and a collective good.
I shouldn't.
The fact that Anakin is so willing to overthrow the Emperor, it just really shows that all he cares about is himself. I mean, again, he's the chosen one, so why shouldn't he be the one to rule the galaxy and make things the way that he wants it to be? It's a great callback to what Anakin and Padme talked about in episode 2, with Anakin saying,
Well, then they should be made to.
By whom? Who's gonna make them?
I don't know. Someone.
You?
Of course not me.
and that's ultimately the through line across the prequel trilogy, and how it evolves from a trade war into the fall of democracy and the rise of an empire. True to the actual spirit of the original Star Wars being a story for 12-year-olds, equipping them with the tools and life lessons needed to navigate the world during a confusing and tumultuous time, Revenge of the Sith really is Lucas sending a message to adolescents, particularly young boys through Anakin, about the dangers of emotional instability, obsessive attachment, and finding ways to balance emotions with reason, to have a more level-headed view of the world around you, while also equipping them with the tools to spot these manipulative tactics from bad faith actors. Lucas's operatic approach to Star Wars is at its absolute peak in this film. The grand scale itself is almost the star, along with Williams' score and ILM. The use of montage in the traditional sense is particularly striking. I mean, it blows me away every time I watch this film and I realize how little dialogue there is and how much of it is just Lucas employing his signature cross-cutting, his impeccable understanding of montage to brilliant effect. I mean, he's letting the story develop in front of our eyes rather than being spelled out for us. In Revenge of the Sith, I really think he took a step back and recognized his weaknesses with dialogue and focuses instead on directing his cast and focusing more on the visual language he's perfected over the years. Lucas understands how to shoot on film and do things practically, and in Sith, he's able to apply similar techniques on digital with CGI. The goal is the same, the general method is similar. It's just a different application of the tools to achieve the same goal. And just as boundary pushing as the practical effects in Star Wars were, Revenge of the Sith brings the CGI of 2005 to its absolute limit. Not all of it has aged perfectly, like some of it you can tell looks like they're up against a green screen, it's looking a little rear projection-y, and if the films were made just a couple years later, it would have had even more leaps and bounds to capitalize on. But someone had to be the first out the gate, and George, being the pioneer that he was always going to pave the way for filmmakers like James Cameron to do what he did with Avatar, which is so great when you consider that Titanic and Cameron's technical achievement with that film is what pushed Lucas to innovate the way he did on the prequels, particularly with The Phantom Menace. Regardless, 20 years later, Revenge of the Sith remains an undeniably gorgeous film, one of the most striking digital movies ever. If the seismic leap between Avatar and Avatar 2 has taught us anything, it's that CGI will continuously improve, and anything we see as the best it will ever get at any given time will ultimately be a mere handful of years from being surpassed. And that's completely in line with the path Lucas forged with his films and with ILM. Of course, his magnum opus, his final directorial statement, would stretch the capacity of what was available at the time. And of course, it would continue to be built upon afterwards. Revenge of the Sith is Star Wars in its truest form, as Lucas envisioned. It's when it truly became a space opera. The Kurosawa influences have never been stronger, save for maybe the first act of Star Wars mirroring The Hidden Fortress. The melodrama, my god, it's heightened to theatrical degrees. I mean, the emotional weight of everything is conveyed with such heft and grandeur that it truly does feel like the end. It's sad, it's dark, but it never becomes so bleak as to lose people, because we know that the good guys eventually win in the end. And now, as Andor wraps up its side of the deconstruction of fascism in Star Wars, Revenge of the Sith being about how fascism rises, Andor about being how we combat and eventually destroy it, I feel we've rediscovered Lucas's ethos in this franchise. It's a testament to George Lucas that he manages to treat the fall of democracy as the horrifying, hopeless collapse it would feel like. It's George at his most passionate. He's speaking from the heart, more explicitly and directly and profoundly in the grandest way possible during a point in time when people were willing to go along with objectively bad things because of how their emotions were manipulated. He was a Padme, a Bail Organa, a Mon Mothma. I think that's also what's so admirable about Revenge of the Sith. He was willing to go against the grain in more ways than one. He endured 2 movies of people shitting on his vision and the story he wanted to tell, because it didn't really matter what story George was going to tell. Everyone had their own idea of what Star Wars should be after Return of the Jedi, and stewed and speculated on that for 16 years before The Phantom Menace. So when they got a film about, a trade dispute and desert race cars, that's a thing. Yeah. Anyways, but you know what? Kudos to George, because he saw it through. As opposed to what Disney did with their sequel trilogy, George understood his vision and stuck to his guns all the way through.
Every movie I worked very hard to make them different. I make them completely different with, different planets, with different spaceships.
But it changed and evolved as he discovered exactly what this trilogy was going to explicitly be about, and how that came into focus through current events, not box office receipts. The prequels really were the largest independent film trilogy ever made. He financed the whole thing, and so made it exactly the way he wanted to. And with the capstone on his Star Wars saga, he had nothing to lose, no reason to hold back, just pure passion and orchestration. It just went all out. And Star Wars was forever stronger for it. Revenge of the Sith is the culmination of an artist exercising their creativity despite what their critics would say. And 20 years on since its release, he's kind of proved the haters wrong. These films have endured, and sure, there will always be people who don't like them, but I think they've garnered a level of respect and admiration from fans because of the conviction of their creator. The whole prequel trilogy is the committed vision of a fearless artist, but that's especially true of Episode 3. It's George Lucas's best directed film and the culmination of his odyssey as a filmmaker, not just Star Wars. For as much as this is a story about the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, it's George Lucas who is the unequivocal star of this film. As I mentioned before, so much of the movie actually happens without dialogue. It's all mood, tone, color, imagery, emotions. And again, John Williams' masterpiece of a score tying a bow on it. I mean, just listen to this. Not to get too sidetracked here, but
So this is how Liberty dies.
the "This is how Liberty dies" sequence, like, that is, oh my god, it's the greatest sequence in the film because John Williams really understands how to play into the moment, make it big and loud and operatic, but also infuse a sense of melancholy and hopelessness. It's like Lucas's cross-cutting between, the Senate hearing of the Emperor basically turning the Republic into the Empire, all while Anakin is killing the Separatists, slaughtering them, like, all while Padme is sitting there hopeless. Like, there's just layers and layers to this thing that make it arguably the most effective sequence in the entire film. And there's so many effective sequences in that film, but that sequence in particular is the pinnacle of Lucas Star Wars. Revenge of the Sith is the pinnacle of what his dream was for Star Wars, but that sequence, it's pure operatic Shakespearean levels of tragedy. Watching George Lucas's fears of democracy ending on screen in the midst of 2025 recontextualizes everything. How we're a couple bad decisions away from being totally decimated. We're living through the crisis. Because Lucas commented on the world that existed at the time, the world we live in now is a direct result of the things we're afraid of from 20 years ago. He saw the writing on the wall, and unfortunately more people weren't perceptive to it. The warning signs have always been there. That, for good and bad, is why Star Wars works. George Lucas understood where the world, and especially America, was at. That's why it endures as a commentary as much as a good versus evil saga. George just gets it. He gets why people are the way they are, how the world ticks. Revenge of the Sith is the pinnacle of that because it refines the prequels, and he delivered the film everyone wanted from the prequels, but maybe not what they expected from them. He turned it into a cultural event bigger than even the original trilogy was. It's a perfect metamorphosis of the elements he tried to get right throughout his career. Even filmmaking-wise, he blended the digital characters with the real humans in a way that felt organic. Like, the close-up of General Grievous's eyes, it hasn't aged a day. It's unfucking believable. The character still holds up exceptionally well, but that shot, man, So the next time you watch Revenge of the Sith, hopefully it was for the 20th anniversary in a theater, but regardless, watch it as a George Lucas movie first, and as Lucas's statement about the world and about filmmaking before you look at it as just the best prequel or even as a Star Wars movie at all. When you view it in the context of this grand finale of Star Wars, although I mean I guess it's not really anymore, but it was at the time, it does George a disservice. It does him a disservice to only ever talk about Revenge of the Sith as a franchise entry and not as an artistic statement in and of itself. So when you watch Revenge of the Sith, watch it in the context of it being the last George Lucas movie, his punctuation point on his journey as a filmmaker.